Today we're going to build a double stack garden bed with gopher wire on the bottom. This is a double stack because we've got these two layers of wood. Over here we have a single stack. This is cheaper, easier to build, and lower, but these are really nice because they're easier to work in, and the gopher wire is deeper, so your roots are going to have more room to grow before the gophers come and eat on them on the bottom. So for some crops with deep roots, this will actually be really nice. And again, they're easier to work in, so they're just really nice. Also, these over here, I just wanted to note, the single stacks, be aware that once you build them, they're eventually going, they'll sink. So I have single stack beds at home that are basically, they've sunk to here. And you know, also, in addition, gophers and bunnies can just hop over these, and they will climb into the beds unless you have covers. Whereas as these ones, the height gives you a little more protection against the gophers and bunnies getting in. So we'll show you how to build this now. The advantage of a single stack bed is that it's cheaper, and faster, and easier to build, less soil to fill. But if you have gophers in your region, they will come and chew on the roots underneath, so this is not going to be 100% gopher proof. Also, if you're building on asphalt, then this depth isn't really deep enough for a lot of your plants, except maybe some lettuces. So it won't be optimal for growing on asphalt, although you could. But this double stack is going to be a lot deeper. It's going to be better. You won't have as much gopher damage on the bottom. If you put it on asphalt, you'll be able to grow a lot of vegetables. The double stack is also easier on your back. It's definitely easier to garden at this height than to come and weed down here. So those are some of the pros and cons of the single versus the double stack. So for the wood today, we're going to use rough cut redwood. I use rough cut timber because I figure why not have more wood. I haven't had an issue with splinters, but that may be something you want to take into account. One tip is to have the lumber cut at the yard for you, so that when you're ready to build, it's just a lot faster. So this is all being pre-cut at the lumber yard. What you're going to need are 4 8-foot long 2x12s. So these are these pieces of wood here. These are going to be the sides of the bed. You're then going to ask for 2 2x12s, 8-foot cut into half. So now this gives us 4 pieces of 4-foot long 2x12. It's really important that it all be rough cut or smooth cut. You have to choose, but make sure all your pieces are the same. And then over here, these are going to be the posts. And these are going to stand like this, and we're going to attach the side pieces to it. But one critical new innovation in this new design is that this post is actually going to stand out above the garden bed. So this is taller than you might expect. Let's say I went for 36 inches. And this is going to be really handy because we're going to attach the garden cover to it, and it's going to be really handy to also attach a trellis because you want to grow vertically if you want to grow a lot of food in a small space. For example, you might want to grow beans or tomatoes. So we'll show you this after we've built the wooden frame. Other things you'll need are these screws. I like to use these really nice sturdy ones so that your garden bed will last 10-15 years. These are rugged structural screws, 5/16 3/1/8. And we're going to use these ties. These are actually for tying together 2 pieces of wood, but we're going to use them to attach the gopher wire, and this is going to be a really cool thing that we're going to do. And then we're going to use these U-staples, poultry staples. These are for attaching the gopher wire. And then we're going to use 2 drills just for convenience. James over here is going to drill the pilot holes, and then we'll use these to screw it in so it'll go faster. Building the bed is actually very fast. The slowest part is attaching the gopher wire and filling it with soil. This stuff is expensive, but it's worth it. This is galvanized gopher wire. This is actually a very fine mesh. It doesn't need to be this fine. You could have one size larger, but you definitely want it to be smaller than maybe ½ an inch. And again, this stuff is expensive but worth it, and we'll come back to that later. So we've lined everything up, and this is a very important part of the design, so do not mess this up. We're first going to attach the long sides to the post. The reason is related to how we tie in the gopher wire later, and I'll explain that later. But align the long sides, the 8-footers, with the post like this, screw them in, and then we're going to put the short sides in. And again, I'll explain why we do that later.
So we've lined up the boards here, and we're going to drill a pilot hole before we drill the screws in. Okay, so we drilled the pilot holes in this alternating fashion for the structural integrity, and yeah, now it's time to drill some screws in.
We're going to drill in the second post, then we'll remove this whole panel and start our second side. So now we're ready to put the sides in. This is wet, uneven ground, so we just put one of the boards under here to try to align it better. We'll take this out later, but we're now going to screw this in, and I want you to really pay attention here. These boards come all the way to the end here, and again, this is related to how we're going to attach the gopher wire. So we're going to screw at least one into the 2x12 and then probably 2 into the post. So we'll do that now. Now we're continuing to put our sides on. It's our first layer, and then we'll put our second layer on in a minute. Now we're going to line the bottom of our bed with gopher wire. Now where we live, Santa Cruz, California, gophers are a major problem. I'll show you here. They're everywhere. Tunnels of gophers everywhere. And they will come up and they will pull down your plants, and you'll be extremely sad. So we really can't garden without any gopher protection. You can trap, if you're really diligent, you could trap them and deal with your gopher problem that way, but for many people that's too much work. So your first line of defense is gopher wire. Now if you don't have gophers, this is not necessary. However, you may want to consider it if you have rats. Rats will tunnel under and could get into your garden bed even if you have good covers. So this could be a good solution if you want to prevent rats from getting inside. But if you have neither rats or gophers, this is probably unnecessary. It's expensive, and it's actually the hardest part of building the garden bed. I wanted to show you an example of why it's so important in California to pay attention to your gopher wire. These are some garden beds. I lost a lot of produce last year. They came up and pulled out a bunch of tomatoes. These garden beds are not that old. I didn't build them. They were built before I got here, but they're less than 10 years old. But the gopher wire gave in at the bottom, so it rusted out at the bottom here. We found some places where it rusted out. It probably wasn't galvanized steel, hard cloth, and I wanted to show you this because the mess and the effort involved in trying to fix this problem is huge. It took us several hours to dig out the soil yesterday. I'm gonna have to put the gopher wire back in and then put the soil back in. So you can see that trying to fix this problem after the fact is really painful. I'm now gonna put this hard cloth in here. This is galvanized steel. I'm hoping this will last longer. Final thing I wanted to show you is the design of the garden beds, because these look beautiful, but they're not rectangular. I'll show you from over here. They're sort of tapered at one end, which means that putting the gopher wire in is going to be a bit of a nightmare because it doesn't fit neatly at the bottom. I'm gonna have to put 2 layers. That's gonna make it a lot more difficult, and I'm gonna have to pay close attention to how I join them in the middle here, because unless I join them really tightly, gophers will simply come in and get around. They will get through any little tiny hole, any little open space that's available. So this is why I always do the garden beds rectangular, and I do them at the size where sort of matching the gopher mesh, so that the gopher mesh fits nicely on the bottom and can be tightly attached to the garden bed. Right, I ended up biting the bullet and taking it apart because there was no way I was going to keep the gophers out of it, but I wanted to show you what a mess it makes. Horrible mess, so much work. So if the gopher wire had been put on correctly in the beginning, wouldn't have to spend hours and hours fixing it. But here you can see what happens. First of all, this isn't proper gopher wire. You need galvanized steel stuff, and you can see these holes, and then the gophers just get through, and once they start getting through, there's no keeping them out. So now I have to build it again. It's probably going to take me 6-7 hours, maybe more, to rebuild it. And otherwise this bed probably would have lasted maybe another 5, maybe even 10 years. So the gopher wire is the limiting factor. So put it on properly and put some high quality stuff on. The more I take apart this garden bed, the more I'm noticing something interesting. In many locations, these holes appear through the double gopher wire. So this is a double layer of, well, some kind of metal mesh that was laid down. But these holes are not random. So if this had been rusted out, they would kind of appear randomly on the top and the bottom layer, but they're not. They're all occurring in the same spot, which to me indicates that something has actively tried to chew through both of the layers. And here's another example over here, hole in the same spot, and another example here, hole in the same spot through both layers. So I think these gophers or rats or whatever it is, they're actively chewing through this wire, which is why you need something really solid in the beginning to start with. And I might even start doubling up on my stainless steel superfine gopher mesh. Okay, so what do we have here? This is hard cloth, so it's galvanized steel with a small mesh. You need a small mesh. This is probably a bit of an overkill. What is this, quarter inch?
This is like 1/4 inch.
You could do 1/2 inch, but you don't want to go any bigger than that. And very important to use galvanized, as we'll show. Don't use chicken wire. That's simply not going to work, and then it'll be a major disaster to redo your bed if you put chicken wire on the bottom. This is the most important step. I want to really emphasize that. It also takes the most time because you're going to be putting in these nails, and actually takes quite a long time to hammer these in. So these are poultry net staples. Get the biggest kind that you can find. Often at this step, I actually turn the bed over 180 degrees, so hammering in is easy, but we're just going to show it like this. So you're going to go around and hammer in your gopher wire all the way around, like this. And then as an extra precaution, we're going to put these in. These are ties. Pick them up at the hardware store, they're not very expensive. And you're going to go around as much as you have patience to do so, and you're going to really whack them in all the way around. Got some on the corner here, so let's try over here. The key to this is just really whacking them in. Okay, over here I want to show you something very important. Where we live, this hard cloth comes in 4-foot width. And so when we started building the bed, we told you that the short piece had to go over the long piece. The reason for that is so the whole bed is 4 feet long, so we can fit the gopher wire on. If you make a mistake and put this long piece over the top, your gopher wire is going to fall short, and it's impossible to put them on properly and mend it and tie it together in a way that the gophers won't get in. Final thing I wanted to show you is usually I wrap this around on the edge. James didn't do it here, but I would recommend wrapping it around and pinning it in here, and I'll show you a video of that. And then, yeah, this will probably be the most time-consuming part, but it's well worth it. This will probably last 10 plus years. I recently pulled out a bed that was 6 years old, and the wire was in perfectly good condition. So I think it's going to last 10 plus years. And the key is to seal it, make it adhere properly so you don't have gophers. They will try to push under here, and they will try to get through here and get through. Now you're done building this bed, you're ready to fill it with soil. Brief comment on these posts. You're probably wondering why we left these posts in. These are actually a key feature of our design. They're going to be really useful for a couple of things. One is putting your garden covers on. We'll do a separate video on how to make garden covers and why putting proper garden covers on is so difficult. But these are going to be key to that. So these you're going to find really useful. In addition, you're going to want to grow a lot of tall things. Vertical gardening will allow you to get the most yield out of this garden bed. Peas, beans, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, you're going to want to trellis them really high, and you're going to need solid ways of trellising, and this post is going to enable you to build some really nice solid trellises for that. Now that you've built your garden bed, you're going to want to fill it with soil. Don't rush out and buy bag soil because you're going to need a ton of soil to fill this. We'll show you the size of the pile. This is the size of the pile roughly that you're going to need to fill that garden bed. You're going to need about 2.5 cubic yards of soil. Sometimes they only deliver 3 cubic yards. You'll probably want to have that delivered in a truck. So figure out how many garden beds you want and calculate how many cubic yards you want and have it delivered all in one go. Now, a downside of having a tall bed is that filling it with soil is really expensive. Soil is really expensive. So where we are, I use a kind of a top quality blend. It's $140 per cubic yard, and for 3 cubic yards plus $200 of delivery fee, we're looking at $620 only to fill this garden bed. So that's pretty expensive. So brace yourself and be aware of that. There is another method where you can cut down on costs and also build good quality soil. It's called Hugelkultur. It comes from Germany. There are some pros and cons to that, which we'll detail in a separate video on filling beds Hugelkultur style. But in the meantime, let's go look at the size of the pile that you're going to need. And you're going to need to invite some friends over or use your kids to, we find it easiest to wheelbarrow it over and then put it in some buckets and then throw it in here. And I think we once calculated with the students, it requires 64 of those orange Home Depot buckets to fill this kind of garden bed.